Good evening, welcome to Simpson at 8. It has been a roller coaster of a week, and the elections count has officially come to an end. The Fiji First government of Prime Minister Voreqe Bainimarama has pulled off a narrow win and is set to govern the country for the next 4 years. The election has been hard fought, and some controversies, confusion and dispute continue to linger about the campaign, the electoral system and the counting process. Joining me this evening to discuss how he saw the process and the political trends arising from the elections is former supervisor of elections for the 1992 and 1994 elections and partner of Manrole's Jon Apted. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stanley. Good evening.
So as we record to go to air, the writ of the elections has been returned to His Excellency the President, along with the names of the 51 candidates who have made it to Parliament. Is the elections officially over?
Yes and no. The return of the writ this afternoon is the end of the formal part of this election. However, there's now a 21-day period in which a candidate or a voter can challenge the outcome by taking an election petition. 21 days thereafter, the court has got to decide. So we've got some issues that the parties have raised. So if that happens and they're successful, we may end up with a change or going back.
So what are some of the issues that can be contested in these 21 days?
They can contest, for example, whether all registered voters were allowed to vote. They can contest whether the counting was correct. They can contest whether those votes that were declared invalid were truly invalid, or whether they should be brought back into the count. There's a number of things that they can.
So basically some of the issues that the political parties have been raising are issues that can be contested.
That is correct, yes.
Because political parties are unhappy with the counting process, and they've been meeting this afternoon to discuss the course of action they'll take. Mm-hmm. They say they have evidence that will show that the general election was not held in accordance with the rules that set out under the Electoral Act 2014. Electoral Act 2014. So what do you make of the position they're taking? Because we saw similar things happen in 2014. Is this a case of just sour grapes and not accepting the win, or do you think they have a case?
Well, I don't know. I don't know the specifics of what they're talking about. I haven't actually been involved with any of the political parties. But let me say this first. When I was supervisor back in 92, 94, at every election, you always have parties and candidates who are unhappy. The ones who don't win always complain. Even the ones who end up winning raise complaints, out of
during
anxiety.
The process,
yes, out of anxiety.
Then suddenly it becomes okay when they win.
Yes, that's right. That's the irony. So, the process of it's normal to have complaints. So I can't say right now whether they're justified or not. But if these complaints were to be taken further on an election petition, the complainants would have to prove what they're alleging, and they've got to prove that it affected the outcome.
So within 21 days?
Yes, within 21 days.
And will the ruling be made also within the 21 days, or can it be made afterwards?
No, the ruling, it's 21 days to bring the petition, and then 21 days for the court to decide the petition.
So within 21 days, everything then really is over?
Yes.
You would say?
Yeah, within a period of 42 days.
Nothing is entertained further, it's completed.
That's if the court does not order people to go back to the polls. Because they can a court, depending on what the allegation that is proved is, can either change the people who are returned without an election, or they can order a new election. But that would be pretty extreme.
Pretty extreme to do. So one of the disputes that's being made is this dispute over the verification of the protocol of results. The party said this was the process that was agreed to, that they would check everything before it was entered. According to the Fiji Elections Office, there is no law that requires them to do this. However, they, in good faith, suspended the count to get them to catch up with their verification process. According to the Fiji Elections Office, the parties were behind in their verification, as it appears they did not have the manpower or the expertise to go through all the protocol of results within the time frame they were given. The protocol results were given to them in batches. It was cleared at midnight. They said it was sorted out by midnight, and then official entering of data resumed at 3 a.m. Opposition parties continued to maintain that they did not get a chance to verify this. How big an issue do you think this is?
It's a trust and confidence issue. Just to explain what these protocols are. At the moment, under the system, at the end of polling, the votes are counted at the polling station. The presiding officer then has to prepare this protocol, which has the results on it. He or she is required to stick it up on the wall outside the polling station. At that time, the party agents who are there take a photo of it and they send it in to their people or ring it in. At the count center, when the hard copies come, which is what's happening here, before they're entered, they're claiming that they have the right to cross-check what they've received from the polling center, from their agents at the polling station against what the hard copies that's received before it's entered, so that they have any fights before the numbers are announced to the country. And they're, as I said, naturally suspicious. That's normal. So they want to
especially as they're behind in the count.
That, exactly. So they're behind. The issue is, and I believe that they're claiming that there was some agreement with the Electoral Commission that they would see it before it went up. So there's a legal requirement that there be transparency. They claim that this was a requirement, and then so if it is not being followed, they're even more suspicious as to what's going on.
So big issue, small issue?
Because
they're saying it's a big issue, and Sanim said yesterday it's a very small matter.
Well, it depends. I mean, it's a non-issue if what is on the forms is exactly the same as what they took a photograph of at the polling station. It could be a big issue if what they have a record of is different from what is on the final hard copy, and it can't be explained why the difference.
Okay, so the opposition continues to say it's a breach of procedure that will be decided by law if they make the complaint.
Yes, and I mean, like I said, it will, if they take it to the court, it's only significant if it affected the outcome of the election in terms of how many seats people got or who was the candidate that was declared elected.
All right, so if I gathered correctly from what I've seen, they're saying that they will take it forward to the courts to ensure that justice is done.
And that's their prerogative.
That's their prerogative. But you're a legal expert. You've handled these kind of cases before. You're one of the most experienced lawyers handling this. You handled the one for Michael Eleoeres, I believe. You can explain some of that if you want. But how do you see this case that they're trying to take? How do you see that working out?
I don't know what their evidence is. They need evidence. You can't just make these allegations. They've got to show that what the record that they got from their polling agent for a polling station was different from what was entered, and they've got to show that their record was reliable.
Okay, so it's something that they can basically it's something. I'm trying to gather my thoughts here about how they'll do it. If you're a legal person, would you see it as something that's worth taking across?
It depends on their evidence. They've got to be sure before they bring the case that what they have is different from what was entered, and they've also got to be sure that what they have is accurate.
Because some would argue it's worth a shot because of how close this race is at the moment. Would you?
The race is close, but that doesn't mean that you...
I mean, the race is over, but it's a close result.
The result is very close.
Yeah.
And the chances of upsetting it, there's a reasonable chance of upsetting it. There's only a margin of, I think, 73
over the 50%.
Over the 50% line. And also on the DONT system thing, there's a margin of only 151 votes between Fiji First getting 27 seats instead of 28 and NFP getting 4 seats instead of 3. So there's enough margin in there for, let's say, NFP to challenge invalid votes.
To say, no, you'll get 4 instead of 3.
Yes.
Because I saw people responding to some things we posted when we reported the news, saying, no, NFP should be getting 4. But the Fiji Elections Office has determined, no, they're getting 3.
Yeah, that's a determination according to the DONT system.
Right.
And the Elections Office is actually correct. But what I'm saying is that the margins are so narrow between between making a difference in how many seats people get by 1, that it may be worth, if NFP can find 152 people, for example, who turned up at a polling station and were not allowed to vote, and they had properly registered for that polling station, they may be able to do it. Or they can find 156 votes in the 4,000 that were invalid, that were actually valid,
And say, hey,
this was wrongly declared
right.
invalid. They may
It could
do
make
it.
it could make a difference.
Yes, it could.
Because I'm looking at the figures. Fiji first 454,335 valid votes cast, and I'd like to let the audience know, look, a lot of things happening pretty quick, and we are digesting these numbers. But 454,335 valid votes cast. The halfway point needed to win was 227,168. Fiji first polled 227,241, over a 73 vote margin over the 50%. The Sudelpa and NFP was about 12,000 votes away from it. So basically worth taking a look at.
Yeah, I mean, like if I were an opposition party and I had, sort of some evidence, it may be worth taking.
Before we go to the break, in your opinion, did we have a free and fair election?
Based on what I know so far, because we don't have any evidence, yes, we did. But we have to wait and see what the opposition parties can produce to back up their allegations.
Because the Morgue stated in a preliminary statement this afternoon that they saw it as the will of the people was reflected.
I mean, I would agree based on what we know.
What you saw.
Yeah.
What would be the conditions that determine free and fair elections? Just if anyone asks, what makes it free and fair?
That the system was run in a way that allowed people to choose the government of their choice without pressure, and which fairly, the rules were followed, and which fairly reflected the will of the people.
All right, and we'll go to the break now. But when we come back, we'll talk about the counting process, which caused a lot of confusion with these elections. We're with Jon Apted. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back. You're watching Simpson at 8. We're with Jon Apted, former supervisor of elections, 1992 and 1994, and a partner at Manrulis. Now, John, the voting process seemed to have turned out okay. It was quite easy. A lot of people said they had a pleasant experience. Although voter turnout seemed low, is low, which we will discuss later. But it was the counting process that has generated a lot of confusion and some dispute. The biggest confusion was this provisional results versus official results issue and the count and release methodology. What happened there? What was the issue?
Okay. First, I'd just like to take the opportunity to congratulate Mr. Saneem and his team. I mean, all of the thousands of people who worked across the country, because I will say that the administration of the poll was excellent. The ease with which everybody voted, including me, was great. And what happened later about the results, the confusion, because there really was confusion, was unfortunate. With all due respect, I differ with how the Elections Office and the Multinational Observer Group see the question of the provisional reports. My reading of the Act is that, okay, what happens is, and this is part of the confusion, previously under the old system, the votes, all the ballot boxes would be brought into a divisional center to be counted. And you had the central, the western, the eastern, and the northern, and then it was announced out of there. Under this system, it's not like that at all. What is required to happen is that at the end of the poll, in each polling station, the presiding officer counts the ballots. And like I said earlier...
In front of the party agents?
In front of the party agents and everybody there. And like I said earlier, when that's done, he or she fills out a protocol, which shows the results. What the Act says is that as soon as the presiding officer is finished preparing that protocol, he or she is to post one up, which is the one I referred to earlier, but he or she must immediately notify the supervisor in Suva of what's on that protocol. And you need to do it either by telephone or by electronic means, which is email. So you either send a photo with your phone or you email a photo to the supervisor. Then what you're supposed to do if you're the presiding officer is parcel up all of the ballot papers and all the used and unused and everything together with the original and send it to Suva. And of course that will take time if you're in Vanuatu or the Western Division or whatever, but the supervisor will have received the phone version or the email version. And what the Act says, and this is where I differ, what the Act says is that the supervisor begins to prepare only one tally of the polling station votes as soon as he gets the telephone or electronic one. And you're supposed to start with that, and as you get the information by electronic means or phone, you amend, and as the hard copies arrive, you also amend as necessary. Now, if you have a proper system for sending, what you get by phone or email should not be different to what you get in the hard copy.
Right.
There's no reason to distrust it. But yes, sometimes mistakes are made, and if they are, the Act foresees that you will amend it. And if you announce it at the time you amend it and show the people what's happening, it's not a big deal. But the point I'm making is that the Act foresees that there's only one tally that gets prepared, and it should start being prepared publicly in front of the agents and those present in the counting center as soon as the telephone or email information arrives. And it's based on both that as verified against the hard copies when they arrive. So it's a one tally that begins and ends
So
in progress.
but one tally should be electronically entered again straight away, or what are you
It can be. I mean, like, it allows you to do it electronically. What I'm saying is that what happened here was they got telephone ones or email ones. They started what was called a provisional one.
Yeah.
And then they abandoned
It
it.
is coming in the app.
Yes, it was coming in the app as provisional. Then they abandoned it at the 70% mark and said, we are beginning the final because the final is based on the hard copy protocol. So they distinguished between the telephone email tally, based tally, and the hard copy tally. The Act doesn't...
Even though it's the same.
It should be the same. And that may be because they suspect there may be errors. But the Act doesn't say that. The Act says you start your tally with the telephone one, and then you amend it if the hard copy, for any reason, is different because you misheard.
Because what I understand from them was that some of the presiding officers did not call in.
Well,
and they had to start the official tally.
That may have been so, but it still doesn't mean that you do two tallies. If you're doing the tally, that one and only tally, and a presiding officer doesn't call in before he parcels and sends, that's blank until the hard one comes. But it doesn't mean you have a separate tally.
So, in your view, what they did was not according to law?
On my reading, I'm not going to give a definitive statement.
Yeah.
I'm not the court. But in my view, that was not according to law. But more importantly than that, it's not really about the law. It's about the effect that it had on the people.
Yeah.
Because that's what
Led
you're
to the
really...
confusion and frustration
that's what you're really worried about.
and concerns.
Yes, and I can see what happens. What happens is when you're in charge of administration of a huge thing, time limited, and you've got all this stuff at stake, you think in terms of your process. But the electoral system and the voting is really about the people. It's the one time that every adult in this country gets to choose their government, and they need to know who it is. So your administration should be focused equally on getting the message out there. And what happened here was that people saw the provisional, they see their party winning, losing, and then it stops at the 70% mark, and then suddenly it starts again, and the party that was losing is winning. So all of a sudden they're having a party.
Two different trends that they were seeing.
Yes, and they don't understand it.
Yeah.
And so they think,
could they have waited for the official, just that one tally, all to come in and then put out the
that's what I'm
results?
saying. They didn't need to wait. You start the tally with the phone-in or the email.
Okay.
You have a system where it's accurate. That's the same tally that continues. If you should get a hard copy that is different for any reason, you amend what you've already entered, and you announce to everybody,
there's an amendment.
There's an amendment because
this
this error
came in wrong,
happened,
yeah.
and people will accept it if it's transparent.
So I was going to ask, how can this process be done better given the experience? What can be done to lessen this confusion?
I would suggest that the next time they just begin that one tally, not provisional and final, just the tally. as soon as they get information. If people don't forget to phone in, those lines remain blank. If you've put something based on the phone and there's an error and the hard copy comes and you notice it, you amend it. And then the thing only gets finalized when all the hard copies have arrived.
So if there's something to recommend, you would recommend
That's what I would
recommend to the team. Otherwise, great administrative process.
As far as I can see, great administrative process.
It is, after all, a new system. And the general public, the layman, most of us will take some time to get used to it.
Correct.
So, but what are your, now that we've had 2 elections under this system, 2014 and 2018, how do you see the pros and cons of this electoral system that we are using now?
I'll comment not from an administration point of view, but from a political point of view, or from the systemic the systemic parliamentary point of view. I think the biggest weakness, I don't favor the system at all, to be honest. The biggest problem with it is that it's completely abandoned constituency representation. People vote for people at the national level. So what it means is that if you're in a locality and you've got a national political problem that you want to complain about, you've got no MP to go to. And
to represent you, so to speak.
represent you and your local interests. And they can say, people who like the system will say, oh, you can go to anybody. But that person, whoever's
may not
sitting
know
there,
what you're going through.
not just not know, they have no reason to listen to you because their support, beg your pardon, their support comes from across the country. So why should they pay attention to you? If you had a constituency person, they have to because they need your vote specifically.
Yes.
I've got a problem now. I feel very strongly about the crime in Suva City at night. And we complain, but nothing happens. I complain on social media, nothing happens. If it was the old system, I could go to an MP.
Raise it in Parliament.
Yes, or, he
well,
has
you
the
can
power.
still do it now to anyone, they say.
But they have no need to listen to me because their position does not depend on Suva. Their election the next time depends on people spread all over the country.
Is it a system that favors the Fiji First Party, given they have 2 popular...
Yes, it also favors the party that's in government because you can only get elected in this system, or your chances of getting elected in this system depend on a national appeal. You've got to appeal to people across the country.
Yes.
So if you're in government, you're in the news more. So you become famous, nationally famous.
You become more known, especially to the new young voters that's coming through.
To everybody, and they can see you. If you're in the opposition, your chances of being seen are much slimmer, but you can still be seen sometimes. But if you're a new party or a new candidate, how do you get a national profile? It's very, very difficult. You have to have a lot of money in order to push yourself out there.
Yes.
You have to be controversial. You've got to be able to get on television or get on a radio show. And that's not easy.
Not easy. And we saw that in these elections.
Yes.
Only the other 40 members of parliament, candidates for each party, most of them are unknown.
Yes.
Well, only top 5.
See, and even if you look at Fiji First,
so to speak.
If you look at Fiji First, they've been in government, but their vote spread is concentrated on a few people. Even people that were in the government previously haven't got strong support.
And they say that was the strategy they used.
But that's also a function of the system and of media exposure.
Set. Now, also the blackout period was something that was raised about this electoral system. Did you have something similar in 1992 and 94?
Yeah. If I could take back what I said earlier, that's another thing that I would recommend be looked into. And this is not an administrative measure. It's a legal measure. We didn't have a blackout period like this.
But you had a blackout period.
We had a blackout period only on strict campaigning. Because remember, in 1992 and 1994, we didn't have social media. So all you regulated were the handing out of cards and the posters and that sort of thing. That's very easy to regulate. The current one has this blackout on social media, which is ridiculous and unworkable because it's easy to regulate a candidate or a party and tell them you can't do this. But it's very, very difficult to regulate individuals.
But it seemed to have worked.
No, yeah. Well, I don't think it really worked because responsible people refrained from saying anything because they were too frightened to say anything. But irresponsible people were saying all sorts of things
During the blackout.
during the so-called blackout.
Even though they were warned that they monitor the social
Yes, because
media.
you can't police
monitor
this sort of
everything.
thing, like when everybody's doing it.
So how would you suggest it be amended?
See, I'd say get rid of the regulation of social media. The evil is parties giving you things you don't want. Okay? Social media is something that's voluntary. If you don't want to read something, don't access it. It's like access.
But it is there. I know there's fake accounts. Fake,
Yeah, but you can just ignore it. I mean, the fake accounts are not regulated by the blackout anyway. That was the unfairness. So
they continue to do as they wish. Yeah.
Yeah, so in actual fact, the blackout worked in favor of those with the fake accounts because the responsible people who would otherwise balance it were silent.
Was silent on that.
Leaving the platform for the illegal fake news.
So 2 recommendations: change the provisional, the tallying practice, and
the law on the blackout. Yeah.
system. We're with Jon Apted, former supervisor of elections. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back. We're with Jon Apted. We've gone through the administration issues, the process issues. Now let's talk about the politics and the trends that have appeared with these elections. 27 for Fiji First, 21 for SODELPA, and 3 for NFP. Are you surprised that the elections was this close?
Not really. Not really. I had predicted personally amongst my friends that Fiji First would lose support, but would still win.
They'd have enough to
win, yes. And I had a number of friends who thought NFP would do better, but I did not think so. So roughly this, although the seat numbers are slightly different, it follows what I thought would happen.
SODELPA and NFP have improved, and Fiji First has gone down from 59, where they had in 2014, to now just barely getting over the 50%
Yes.
mark.
Fiji First have lost support. NFP is in exactly the same place as it was before in terms of seat numbers, maybe a little bit more in votes. In votes. SODELPA has come forward, yes, has increased its support.
So 27 to 24, Parliament, very tight.
Extremely tight.
You got no room for people traveling during when the vote is taking place, or people turning up to sick. How do you see a parliament working under a 27-24 makeup?
We already have a parliament that sits very infrequently. I mean, this government in the last government, this government when they last won the election, changed the way parliament sits. Previously, it would sit quite often. Now it sits with long intervals in between. It may be that given the fact that they all have to be there and can't afford to be sick or travel, we might see even less sittings of Parliament than before, so that people...
Because it has to fit everyone's schedule.
Yes. So that's not good for democracy, because Parliament should be sitting. People should, like the parliamentarians should earn their money. They should debate. Things should be at regular intervals. So that's one possible outcome.
And the Parliament of the last Parliament was, was pretty, it was constantly referred to as a circus quite regularly by the public.
Well, not just that. The biggest thing as a lawyer, actually, what I don't approve of the last Parliament is that bills, because Parliament is sitting for such a short time and government has so many legislative measures to pass, what they were doing is they were tabling bills, not allowing enough time for people to consider them or the public to make submissions. They didn't make enough time for debate, and so bills were being rushed through, and the result is laws that are not properly thought about and not properly responded to by the people.
So you think that was a weakness of the last one?
Yes.
A lot of people have thought, okay, now we've come through that. People have learned, both parties, the government and the opposition party, that we'd start fresh with these elections and then we look for something more, looking for common ground. But with the atmosphere that's created with this, some people are saying, we're hoping there's a concession speech, as is done overseas, where people say, look, it was a hard-fought campaign. We look forward to working with you now to improve the lives of this country. That doesn't seem like it's going to happen now.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would like to think that, Fiji First might look at, what's happened and maybe modify their system, but I can't predict that. I hope that if they're willing to relax a little bit, everybody tries to work together. I would hope that Parliament does sit more often. I would hope that debates, take longer and that there's more consideration. These are just hopes, but the numbers tend to suggest that this is not likely.
Well, looking at this, the results, Fiji First will be looking at that decrease in their support, and will be looking to address that in the next 4 years. They've done quite well to hold on to a majority. I've also thought it was a change election because they've been there for a while. People have been seeing Bainimarama and Ayaz for the last 12 years and last 4 years as Fiji First. What do you think some of the lessons they should be taking or they could be taking from this election on how they handle governing?
Well, it depends on what their motivation is. If their motivation is to get back the next time...
Well, it's a political environment.
Yes. I mean, if it's that very, very narrow, selfish motive of just surviving, they will look to see where their support has come from, and they will probably look to grow that. They won't necessarily seek to win the people they've lost back, or they won't necessarily seek to win new people over. They may wish to consolidate and grow where their support is, which is the people who respond to their economic measures, the people who respond to their land rent measures, that level of support.
Well, the people that seem to have responded really well to them was, in a big way, was in the Western Division.
Yes, which is where all those benefits go.
That's where they really won the election.
Yes.
They also matched Fiji First in the north.
Yes.
Some say they matched Sodelpa, which everyone thought was a Sodelpa stronghold, and an NFP stronghold. So they were quite powerful, but the one that really pulled it for them was in the west. What do you think that was due to?
Well, they got a lot of support from indigenous Fijians in the West the last time, and a lot of support from voters in the West the last time. They've grown that.
Least money?
There's the least money provision, like I said.
Because I saw Rambuka say, we will bring back the old system, and I thought maybe not.
Well, I mean, I don't know whether, that Rambuka's statement was properly digested, because that was just a few days before the election. But I think that there's general support for Fiji First amongst the landowners there, now that they receive a bit more money. There's also the fact that in the West is where a lot of their assistance was concentrated, because remember, the floods were there. They went in and assisted with the floods, the Wi-Fi parks, and all of those.
It had seemed that it was a vulnerable place for them after Winston.
Yes,
and those schools were still there. But it looked like they did a good job in getting back the trust of the people in the Western Division.
Yeah, they did that on that side. The vulnerable part was Raab, where somebody from NFP did very well in Ra. But the Nandi, Lautoka, Ba, that sort of area was strongly Fiji First.
So Sodelpa and NFP would be really disappointed, one can imagine, with coming this close in changing government. 1-2 seats in there, and they'd be the one running the government for the next 4 years. Now people are looking at the small parties and the impact that they had. Unity Fiji, Hope, and some of those. 12,000 votes could have made that difference. and but they didn't make the threshold. The votes people saying are essentially gone to waste. Would that be correct?
That depends on how you look at it. If you look at it, if you're a person who thinks that the opposition should focus on, displacing Fiji first, you're going to think that those votes went to waste. If you're a person who thinks that people are entitled to pick,
They have the right
to choose a political party that best represents their interests, they're not wasted. At the end of the day, the reality, I think, is this. If the people who voted for one of the small parties, Hope, Unity, or Fiji Labour Party, didn't like SODELPA more than they didn't like Fiji First, then there's no loss. They've done what they're supposed to do. But if they would have, if properly advised, said, okay, I would rather vote against Fiji First and support SODELPA, then that...
Because they would have voted expecting that the members from Unity Fiji and Hope would be in Parliament.
Well, that's the question. If they knew that they mightn't be, but still wanted to vote for them, that's their choice.
That's their choice. So in a brutal assessment, could one say that Unity and Hope denied SODELPA and NFP a chance to form government?
Again, it's a half full, half empty.
Yeah,
If I were SODELPA,
that's the brutal numbers game.
If
yes.
I were a SODELPA person, I'd say yes. If I were a Unity person, I'd say no. That's my right.
Because what seems clear now is this system does not seem to work for the smaller parties.
It doesn't.
It does not suit the smaller parties.
And that's a tragedy, because what it means is that it's very difficult for a new movement to emerge. It freezes the political landscape of the country into the two main parties. And you look at NFP. NFP is still a tiny party on the side. They were actually lucky to make it. And the interesting thing is the whole...
just because they got over the 5%.
Yes, they got 7. But of the 3 who've been returned, the parliamentary face of NFP has changed completely. Historically, NFP was an Indo-Fijian party. That's how it started. If you look at their makeup now, they have 2 indigenous Fijians in the party. So it's quite a different party to what it used to be.
To what the NFP was.
Yes. And so just coming back, my point is really this. The system doesn't allow, let's say, a green party to emerge, because unless it emerges and becomes big overnight, it doesn't favor small incremental growth of any political movements.
So that's a weakness one could argue.
Yeah,
because,
with the threshold.
Yes, with the threshold system. 10 women now in government, perhaps the most we've ever had in any parliament.
Yeah, that's true. That's very good.
5 in government: Premila Kumar, Mereseni Vunuanga, Salai Andimai Tonga, Rosie Akbar, and Vina made it through.
Yep.
And 5 in opposition: Linda, Rote Momu, Andilitiang Ravi, Salote Randronro, and of course Lenora from NFP.
They're all very qualified and very, very good people.
I think they bring good dynamics
Yes.
to Parliament. Notable absence: Fayaz Koya.
Yes, my colleague. Yes.
Brijlal Ilyas Ndalana Matakola, that's from Fiji First. Fayaz, perhaps it was because he was on trade, or it's just that there was no base for him to gather the votes from? Or did he was because all the votes went to Bainimarama, he didn't have enough to get through?
See, that's the challenge, though. That's the challenge of this system. If you have a party like Fiji First that focuses as its strategy on votes for the leader, it means that you're uncertain as to which ones of your other candidates are going to get enough numbers to get in past the post.
Because you could lose some quality candidates.
Like Fayaz, yes, exactly that way. Fayaz's challenge, I suppose, is that he, came into Parliament from a law firm. He's not, although he's from a political family, a dynasty. His father was Sadiq Koya, the first leader of the opposition after independence. His challenge, personally, I think, is that he hasn't spent a lot of time at the grassroots. He's sophisticated. He's been operating as a minister at the business level, but not, where you need the votes, down there amongst the masses.
That's what Bainimarama is. And this, I think, is a challenge for Fiji First into the future.
It will be.
Because it's clear that Bainimarama is the key person.
Yes.
Even though Ayaz was out there quite big, and he expanded his vote, you know, it wasn't a big, real increase.
Yeah, he got about a 50% increase. He's gone from, I think, 10,000. He got
12,000.
12,000 to
To
15, not
15,000.
even 25% increase. He worked hard. He was out there a lot. We saw him, with young people. We saw him at, so
He was
many
in the debates.
places.
He basically was the front face for...
Yeah, he was the public face
face.
for the last few months. And I'm a little bit older than him, but I was impressed, honestly, with how much energy he had. I
So was
can't
I.
do that. So for all of that, he hasn't displaced Frank, the PM, at all as the face of the party. So the challenge for Fiji First and its supporters is succession. What happens to the party after
Prime Minister Bainimarama.
Prime Minister Bainimarama decides to retire? Because everybody eventually does. Is there a party after that, and what does it stand for?
That's right. So also for them, Fiji First, the strength for them, apart from the West, was the Indo-Fijian voters. Historically there was always NFP or Labour.
Right.
And now 90% Fiji First. It's the security and stability that Fiji First is promising them is paying dividends for them. Or what do you think?
Both things. I think the strong appeal that Fiji First has for Indo-Fijian voters is security, but also the equality. Fiji First has a very, very strong equality platform. The scholarships are based on equality as the Indo-Fijian community see it. They don't have any affirmative action programs in favor of anyone. So that appeals to
a range of...
to the
Indo-Fijian
community.
Who've always had things separated for
yes,
them
and
before.
the whole political history of the Indo-Fijian community and of the NFP actually was a fight for equality. And that's what...
And we're seeing a lot of them during the election saying it's the first time they felt like, being proud of being Fijian, which was controversial
and the common name and all of that.
Yeah. Now, Sodelpa, basically, if this Rambuka will not lead them into the next election. So they have a leadership issue to sort out going forward.
It doesn't mean... I don't think that we can say that Rambuka won't lead them into the next election. I think their constitution says that the leader, if their leader loses the election, he loses office. But it doesn't follow that they can't re-elect him. So that's a decision that will have to go to the membership.
They'll have to decide. But there's some good young candidates good dynamic candidates that have come through. Linda, impressive. Number 2 for them. Even went over Rote Mumu's...
But Linda's still sitting only at 9,000. Linda is still not, she hasn't got enough experience and exposure yet to be a national name. Remember, we've just said how this system favors...
She could build it.
It would take time.
Because she's done impressively through this Suva-Nosori corridor to build that name and that presence.
Yeah,
because she was
Nandi.
2,000 and also Nandi with the ATS issue. So 2,000 votes from 2014. Was it 7 or 9,000 now? I'm sorry, my mind's lost
Different
track.
party as well.
Different party as well. But is she someone you foresee as a leadership material
Yes,
for
she is.
Sodelpa?
She is, but I can't see her taking over the party next month.
Next month, no problem. So she did some things right. Rambuka was a strong leader, but he did come with some baggage.
Yes,
1987, NBF and things. Maybe something they need to look to. And then this drama in the lead up to the election with that case, which primarily arose over an oversight.
Yes.
The last minute court win for Rambuka must have had a big impact for them. But how can you avoid something like that happening again? Because it almost led to a credibility issue for this election if he had been thrown out.
Yes. The declaration, the asset declaration issue is a time bomb for everybody. I went and had a look at other people's declarations.
Because they were all different the way they put it.
Yes. And I don't think, honestly, that people properly filled out their declaration. There are a number of others who, could be prosecuted for the same thing that Mr. Rambuka was.
So it's something, there needs to be a proper format and process.
Yes. For example, I'll give you a real example. What the Act actually says is, in terms of liabilities, you're supposed to declare all the liabilities you've incurred and discharged over the last 5 years. That's quite a lot. That's every credit card bill you received, every debt. That's quite onerous.
Yeah.
The form doesn't have it, and
Even
nobody's doing
even
it.
tax debts that you have?
Yes, everything is supposed
Which
to
is
be
supposed to be
declared.
confidential
Yes.
stuff.
If the law was applied strictly, I don't think anybody is complying.
The quality of the campaigns. You know, there's talk about, but how prepared do you think the parties were in terms of the messaging that they were putting out?
Fiji First, of course, was far ahead of anybody else. So they had a big treasure chest. They have, like world-class advisors, and they have smart people in the party. I mean, not going to underestimate the intelligence of their leadership. So their campaign on a national visible level way outclassed everybody else.
And I thought, like NFP, they stumbled on their own signature one on the minimum wage. It became a liability issue for them, which Fiji First used quite effectively against them in some way.
May or may not. I don't know. But yes, NFP's messaging was a little bit mixed and problematic.
Quite a lot of issues to talk about, quite a lot of issues to digest, but I'll just finish off on the issue of the voter turnout. Low voter turnout, 72% roughly, 84% in 2014. That's a disappointment.
It was a disappointment. And who knows, depending on which group did not turn out to vote more than the other one, it could have affected the outcome. Elections are always won on turnout. And I'm not sure that the parties understood the need to motivate their voters to turn out. And just to go back one more thing, on one of my favorite topics, I suspect that the blackout also had something to do with the turnout, because you go right up until 2 days before, there's election, then there's nothing. And then it's a public holiday, you go out the night before, you stay up drinking Angona.
And then we had that weather.
Then you have the weather, you just turn over and go to sleep, and you think, oh, my party will win anyway, or my party will lose anyway, and so you don't bother.
So it could have affected both parties.
It could have affected
all the parties.
Yes, but it depends on different communities respond differently. In urban areas, in a rural area, everybody will go and vote because that's the community thing to do. In an urban area, and if your support comes from the urban area, you're more likely to be affected.
You'd be affected by that. Interesting days ahead.
Yeah.
What would you like to see in the next term from government and the opposition?
I would like to see, honestly, more love. I mean, that sounds wishy-washy, but the last 4 years have been characterized by acrimony and by viciousness and that sort of debate. And you hear it from the people when they complain about what they see on television. I think, since this is it's a big wish, but perhaps people could start looking at more cooperative ways of governing. Yeah.
John, thanks for joining me on the show.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That was Simpson and 8 for the evening. We hope you enjoyed the show, and stay tuned for further elections coverage on MyTV and the MyTV Facebook page. Good night.